and posted on Facebook later on. So thank you to everyone that is joining us. We're really excited to have you guys here. And if you missed our other speakers, you can find those videos on our Facebook or YouTube pages at Lake County Conservation District. You can also find information about our other programs, like our Pollinator Initiative, which actually kicks off next week with our first ever Pollinator Week. We're hosting a ton of family-friendly events with virtual options, like free documentary movie showings, free wildflower seed giveaways, and an online scavenger hunt with prizes. You can find more information about all of that on our website, which is lakecountyconservationdistrict.org. And I'm actually going to drop a link in the chat box right now so you guys can head there and check out all of our programs. One last housekeeping item. There will be a brief survey that's going to pop up when you exit this webinar. You'll have the opportunity to give us feedback about this speaker series and sign up for our newsletter. We would love to hear your thoughts on this series and if there's anything that we can do to improve it for you. Like I said, that'll pop up at the end. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. Diane Boyd. Diane has worked with wolves for more than 40 years. She retired from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks in December 2019 as the wolf specialist for Northwestern Montana. Tonight, Diane will talk about her 40 years of work in wolf recovery, starting with the first wolves to return to Montana in 1979 to the present population of approximately 850 wolves. So we are going to save questions till the very end of this presentation. So if you guys have any questions throughout the talk, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen right next to the raise hand button. And Diane will answer them for you at the end. Thanks again to all who are joining. And Diane, whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away.
Okay. How do I get my screen?
Yeah, so I'll stop sharing here and it should.
There. Now we got to get to my talk. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, so down at the bottom, just click that share screen.
Share screen. There we go. There we go. All right.
Perfect. There, I can see it. You're live.
Okay. We're rolling. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. It's been an interesting year for sure this year. I've done wolf time, and this has been one of the more interesting years for wolves in Montana. So I'm going to talk for probably about 45 minutes, and then we'll have lots of time for Q&A afterwards. So hang in there and we'll get to your questions. And let's see, it doesn't want to advance. Why is that? There we go. Okay. Well, these are basically what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about wolf recovery in Montana, which occurred via dispersal from 1979 when I first got here to 2020. I'll briefly talk about wolf monitoring and management. And when we first started doing wolves here in Montana way back then, it was University of Montana that was doing all of the work, and Fish, Wildlife and Parks didn't get involved for a number of years after that. And we're going to touch a bit on Western U.S. wolf recovery throughout the West, which includes both dispersal and reintroductions. And of course, last but not least, is the challenges due to the huge success of wolf recovery in the West. A little bit about wolf ecology, basics, so you understand why wolves have been so successful. They're a social carnivore and they're family-based, so they have lots of helpers to help provision the pups and ensure their survival if possible. They're terrific dispersers. I mean, this last week, people are sending me articles on wolves from Banff making it to Montana where they were shot. I just had a friend send me a clipping and I confirmed it, but a wolf from the Great Lakes states made it all the way to Nebraska. So they're huge dispersers, and that's why they can go and start off new packs. They're highly territorial. They have a high fecundity rate, which means they reproduce at a pretty high rate. They only breed once a year, but they're pretty successful. They're highly adaptable, and they can live just about anywhere, and they're habitat generalists. So the wolves, other than humans, have had the greatest worldwide distribution of any mammal on the planet, except for people. So they can live in the desert, in the rainforest. I mean, they can live anywhere. little bit of brief history. By the 1930s, the wolves were killed off in about 98% of the range and basically survived just kind of in the Midwest in a viable population. There were a few wolves coming and going in the West and the Southwest, but they eventually were all shot. And the Endangered Species Act passed in 1973, which gave wolves full protection. Bob Rheem was my mentor at the University of Montana, and he started the Wolf Ecology project in 1975, just following up on wolf sightings that happened. They were just trying to document if there were wolves in the state or not, and if they were reproducing or not. So in 1979, the first wolf was trapped and collared in the North Fork of the Flathead, and we named her Kishnina after a creek in Canada. And these are the trappers who caught her and put the radio collar on her. She was just north of the border, about 8 miles, and that began our Wolf Ecology project. So she was trapped on April 4th, 1979. I came on the scene that fall in 1979 and began tracking the wolves. This female wolf was eventually joined by a 3-toed male, so he had survived a trap somewhere, lost a toe in the process. So that Kishnina wolf and this male produced their first litter in 1982, and it was the first time, and they were just north of the border, and they tiptoed down into Glacier Park a little bit. Kishnina disappeared. We don't know what happened to her. New wolf came in. Wolves come and go, and then there was another litter born in 1985. I think the amazing thing about Kishnina is that the male was killed in the summertime, and she managed to raise 7 pups by herself. So again, they're pretty resilient. So the thing I really always have to stress is that wolf recolonization occurred in Northwest Montana via dispersal from Canada. Wolves were not brought here by humans, period. I was here. So I'm just going to clear that up right now. They walked down from Canada. In 1986, the wolves had their first den in Glacier National Park for the first time, the same pack, and it was the first den in the Western US in over 50 years. And I took this photo. This is actually the den that the wolves are in, about 10 miles south of the international border on the west side of Glacier Park. Bob Rheem took this photo of the Magic Pack in 1987. There's 11 wolves there, and we call them the Magic Pack because it was kind of magic that they survived and that they stayed and it did so well. So go from this first pack and the very first wolf west of the Mississippi to right now, presently, there's about 2,400 wolves in the Western states. And if you would have asked me back in 1979 if I ever thought there would be this many wolves or trapping and hunting, I would have just kind of laughed and said, well, maybe. But anyway, they've done very well. This is a picture of Mike Fairchild and I taking blood from a wolf pup in Glacier Park in 1986. And eventually she dispersed to the yak and disappeared. But we did the basic usual biology stuff. You can read the list there. And I was really interested personally in dispersal. How do these wolves recolonize new areas? Because you got to remember, there weren't wolves in the West anymore and nobody really knew much about them. But there's a long list there of the various things we looked at. And we went through many years with amazing volunteers. A lot of these volunteers I'm still in touch with, we're still friends, and they've gone on to become really amazing professionals. And they work for nothing, literally. There was no per diem, there was nothing. They had all the scenery and top ramen they could eat, and that's how we did our job. And we waded the North Fork of the Flathead River every day in the winter, and we skied on the wolf tracks with the aid of radio telemetry gear, so we knew where the wolves were. You got to remember, back in those days, there was no such thing as GPS. There were no cell phones. There were no spot devices. DNA was something in the laboratory somewhere else, but it wasn't used to track animal populations. Like nowadays, we can learn a huge amount about an animal by collecting its scatter, urine, or hair and run the DNA. And we didn't have any computers. So everything was done by hand. It was very labor intensive. And then we'd collate at the end of the year, and we'd do quarterly reports, and we'd analyze the data. This is a picture of the airplane wing with an antenna on it flying over the Rocky Mountains. It wasn't always a smooth ride. Prior to wolves being reintroduced in 1995 from that first pack in northwestern Minnesota, we watched the population grow. My cursor works here, and you can see here's Kishnina, one wolf, and then they had that first litter in 1982, and it just kind of sputtered along, and then it began to take off. And so just as the wolves were beginning to get critical mass in terms of natural recovery, the reintroductions were planned and went forward. But there were 70 wolves here in Montana that walked here prior to any wolves being reintroduced in Yellowstone and central Idaho. This is a really interesting young wolf. I tagged her here in 1985, right here at the northwest corner of Glacier Park. And when she got to be a couple of years old, she just disappeared in December. And 7 months later, she was shot right up here by a guy who saw her in July, just didn't want the wolves there. So she shot her, and she was traveling with 4 other wolves. So she had joined a pack. And she had gone 550 miles minimum distance in that 7 months of time. And the thing I want you to notice is these 2 orange spots, Hinton and Fort St. John's, are the places where the wolves were taken and captured that were moved down to Yellowstone and central Idaho. So this little wolf here showed us that through her own 2 feet, through dispersal, this is one wolf population. They are not foreign 200-pound Canadian wolves. These are all the same population of wolves within walking distance of each other. And interestingly, if she would have gone south, she would have been 100 miles south of Yellowstone Park. So again, it's one population. This is a map taken at the time when they were going to reintroduce wolves here in northwestern Montana. It's all was regarded as a fully endangered population versus the central Idaho and greater Yellowstone area, where they were considered to be non-essential experimental populations, so they could be removed pretty easily if anything was a problem, versus up where we are, where the wolves walk down naturally, they were more protected by the Endangered Species Act. So the reintroduction happened, and over 2 winters, they introduced a total of 66 wolves, about half in Yellowstone, half in Idaho. The wolves that went to Yellowstone were done in a soft release, which means they were put into pens and they were held for 2 months, and they were put in there as a pack unit with the hopes that those wolves would remain a family group, and they held them through breeding season. They opened the doors just before the wolves were about to den, which is, by the way, right now. So the peak of wolf breeding season is about Valentine's Day, and the peak of wolf denning is about tax day. That's kind of a way to remember it. And in Idaho, they had hard releases where they just backed up to the edge of the wilderness, opened the doors and the crates and kicked them out. And they use young wolves doing that, kind of teenage wolves. They hit the ground running, and hopefully they just find each other, which they did. And you got to remember, when this was done back then, it had never been done. So nobody knew what would transpire. This is a map of 15 years of wolf dispersals from 1993 to 2008. And in just that little 15-year period, you'll see the wolves from all these areas, the populations are connected. They all overlapped, and they dispersed to 2 countries, 7 states, and 2 provinces. And I mean, if I updated that map, we don't have the data in one spot to update it from 2008, but basically all over the West, wolves just go, they wander. So the kind of things I want to talk about that have happened with the Montana wolf management scene is the original number of wolves. Everybody talks about these numbers. There was decided that there was supposed to be 300 wolves spread out between Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. And so there'd be about 10 breeding pairs or 100 wolves per state. And Wyoming didn't want to play the game with the feds and didn't do a management plan that was acceptable. So then Montana and Idaho stepped up to get them delisted quicker, said, we'll take it on, and we want a minimum 150 wolves in each state. Well, at that time, there weren't that many then when this was planned, and very quickly there were. So 300 wolves, 15 breeding pairs in each state. And those recovery goals were met in 2002. And the recovery goals meant that population level had maintained for 3 consecutive years. So the Montana Wolf Conservation and Management Plan was accepted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2004. It met all the mandates in endangered species. And the feds handed over wolf management basically with oversight to the state of Montana. After 5-6 years after that, the wolf population was continuing to increase, and the federal government said, yeah, we're just going to delist them because you're doing well. They were delisted in Montana and Idaho, and Wyoming eventually joined the party and wrote a management plan that the feds accepted in 2017. So the wolves were all delisted in these 3 states. In Montana, they were classified as a species in need of special management. And it's the only animal in that category. It's not a fur bearer. It's not a big game animal. It's not a varmint. It's a species in need of special management. The state decided to do that to give them some extra flexibility in ways to manage this carnivore, because nobody really knew what it would entail at that point. So populations were building, and Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks opened a hunting season in 2009. And then 2010, it was a hunting season, there was no season. And then in 2011, it was hunting and trapping seasons open, and they've been open every year ever since. The process to monitor the wolves is funded by the sale of wolf licenses and Pittman-Robertson Act, which is a tax basically on sporting goods. And it costs about $400,000 a year. So on average, about 20,000 wolf licenses are sold per year, and there's no limit on the number of wolf licenses that can be sold. Everybody in the world could buy a wolf license. And until, this is about to change with our legislature now, but there was 5 wolves per person with an unlimited number of licenses allowed to be killed, whether you took them through trapping or hunting. Federal USDA investigates and resolves any kind of livestock depredation. It's not the job of Fish, Wildlife and Parks. It's a federal agency, Wildlife Services. The Montana Livestock Loss Board pays compensation somewhere between $65,000 to $85,000 per year for animals confirmed killed by wolves. The interesting thing is Montana law, there's the statute, requires Fish, Wildlife and Parks to collar any packs that may come in contact with livestock. And that is almost an impossible task because they're hard to catch and they live in remote places often. The bottom line, the italicized, wolves were just delisted in January of this year in all of the United States except for the Mexican wolves. So there's there'll be new rules to follow. The hard part about wolves is managing them to please hunters and ranchers who have to live with them and potentially suffer, or at least perceive suffering, some losses. So ranchers lose livestock, hunters feel they lose ungulates that they want to take themselves. So there's these conflicts are just set up innately because wolves are predators. This is a picture taken outside the Fish, Wildlife and Parks office in February of 2009. Protesters on the side of the street right out in front of the office on Meridian here. And it was pretty interesting. They were friendly enough, but they really wanted to be heard. And it was about 15 degrees out, and Jim Williams invited them to come on in for coffee and picked up some donuts and let them warm up a little bit. And they went back out on the street, but they made their point, and a lot of people saw them, but wolves were here. So that's how it went. And interestingly, there have been quite a few studies done on wolves all over the country. There was a recent study done in the Bitterroot, maybe 5 years ago now, the Bitterroot elk study. You can Google it at Fish, Wildlife and Parks, where they radio-collared elk and the calves, they were newborn, they hit the ground, they put transmitters on them. They collared wolves, they had lion hunters in, they collared mountain lions. They studied every elk that was killed, and most of the elk that were killed, adults and calves, were killed by lions, not wolves. Surprised a lot of people, and bears were right up there too, and wolves were not that big of a predator compared to the others. Of course, people hunt. I'm a hunter. We take our share of game. Grizzly bears can actually have quite an impact on, especially calves. And it's actually, I go to Yellowstone in the spring and watch grizzly bears hunting elk calves in the first week of June. They're pretty effective predators. Black bears as well. So they're not just take calves, they can take an adult too. By far and away, the largest killer of elk is this bottom slide, is this bull elk that is starving to death. So winter and the severe winters we have, like every decade, they have the biggest impact of all comparatively to everything else. And it doesn't happen really often, but when you have a really big winter, the deer and elk really take it in the shorts. Then of course, there's a lot of cars, automobile collisions with ungulates. So there's a lot of studies that have been documenting all this in Montana and other Western states. And yet people say, but the wolves have killed all the game. Sometimes in some places they can have adverse impacts on populations. when the populations get low, the wolves starve. Pups don't survive. It's just a check and balance. There were wolves living with deer and elk long before us people settled the country. This is a slide of the number of cattle and sheep killed by wolves. So let's just walk through it a little bit. Sheep is kind of the sheep colored line. You'll see there was a huge surge here in 2009. Cattle is the black line. It went up and then had a big hit in this year. And then ever since then, it's tapered off. And wolves is the dotted line. And these are the number of wolves killed by wildlife services for depredations. And so it's been pretty well documented. They came in pretty heavy and hard and killed off the wolves, killed a number of wolves that were depredating, and that reduced the depredations. And then the number of wolves being killed for depredations was also reduced. So it was pretty effective. Survey techniques have changed greatly since I started doing this 40 years ago. First early years, it was more hands-on, snow tracking, howling, checking out reports by citizens, the old VHF collars, and telemetry. And now we've gone to GPS collars. Geez, my last couple of years at Fish, Wildlife and Parks, put GPS collar in a wolf, go to my office, break out my muffin and my tea, and go on the computer and look and see where the wolves are at. It's pretty darn amazing technology. POM, I'm going to talk about. DNA has become a really great tool for looking at these things. I use a lot of cameras for camera trapping wolves, and you can document without having to be there, and it's a very effective tool. Drones are just starting to break into the reality of being able to monitor animals with it. I think the day will come when people can use drones to note where there's a den site, a rendezvous site, and from some distance survey, see how many pups are and leave without having to disturb the animals. It's kind of like camera trapping. You don't have to physically go into the site. It's a good way to do it. Telemetry still is being used. And there's a lot of modeling that's going on nowadays. And much of our data that's in the Fish, Wildlife and Parks annual report, which should be published probably midsummer, is based on a lot of modeling, including the method of counting the wolves called POM, which stands for the Patch Occupancy Model, which I'll spend some time on. But basically, we're moving away from hands-on to more remote methods to monitor wolves as technology develops. Okay, we're going to get into POM here, so bear with me. So the problem with counting wolves is you could only get a minimum. So if all the biologists all add together and they say, well, we know that there are 470 wolves. It's just a minimum count. We're not saying there's 470. There's definitely more. But how many more? We don't know. So as wolves continue to expand their populations and they're very secretive, it really became an impossibility just to document where these elusive carnivores live. So Patch Occupancy Model, or POM, has become the method since 2019 on how we count wolves. It's a model, and I'll go through how the parameters work, but it's more cost efficient, it's more accurate. There's like 95% confidence intervals on it, meaning it's pretty darn accurate count. And it gives the number of wolves about a third higher than what the minimum counts were from the biologist counting. So that makes sense to me. So the way the POM works, this is a state of Montana gridded into patches. Each of these squares is called a patch. And it's about, you probably don't want to talk metric, 600 square kilometers, 232 square miles, which when POM was developed was through field data was determined to be the average territory size. And here's this little asterisk because last year POM was revised, but we'll get there. So each of these represents a possible size of a territory. And then at the end of the hunting season, for all you hunters who are out there, you get the call. I said, yeah, did you harvest your deer elk? And what did you see? And blah, blah, blah. And by the way, did you see any wolves? So the data is recorded on how and where, how many wolves are seen and where. And basically to determine if the patches are occupied or not. It's a probability ranging from 0, no wolves were seen here, to one of these intensely red ones, like up here, and that's what becomes a 1, so 100% that there are wolves there. And you add up all these probabilities, multiply by the average pack size, and you come up with the number of wolves for the state. So if you want to kind of look at the squares here, they're ranging from low to high. The green is like nada, occasionally wolves, but they aren't living and breeding there. And to the darkest intensity, which is red, which is the wolves are definitely there. They're 100% chance they're there. They're breeding there. And the large, the dots are the pack centers, and the small dots are where wolves are harvested and killed. So it all fits together. Once in a while, you get wolves trying to make it out here in the open, and they don't last very long. They get killed. But you see, wolves basically live in the western quarter of the state. This graph's complicated, so just take a breath. But what I want you to, the thing to look at is the green line. The green line is the number of wolves estimated up through 2019. They haven't quite got the 2020 data out yet. And when they do, I will update this for future talks. So to walk through this, the old way of counting was the minimum count that the biologists physically saw from the airplane. You'd see 7 wolves in that pack and 2 wolves in that pack and 11 wolves in that pack, and you add them all up. So the minimum count was the only way that it was done up until 2007. And you see, here's the number. And then the minimum count continues. And so what I was saying earlier is that the number of wolves above this minimum count estimated by POM, which are these blue bars, is about 1/3 more than what we were seeing. So I'm going to explain what the confidence interval is. From this point to this point is the span, the range that that count could be. And the center right there is the number. So I connected the line over the center of all these, and then either side is, well, it could be this low, it could be this high. We're 95% sure that it's within this range. But what interesting pattern is so by minimum count, we peaked out at wolves at about 2011 to 2013, and then they kind of tapered. And the POM shows that it peaks out in 2013, and it again drops a little bit, and then it levels off. Those estimates are pretty, they jive with each other pretty well. The other thing is the confirmed livestock depredations is the dotted line, and it follows the same pattern. It goes up, and then they come in and they kill the depredating wolves, and the number of depredations drop. The wolf harvest, which started in 2009 and it was closed in 2010, it jumps up. And interestingly, it kind of continues to keep increasing, which I'm going to address a little bit later. And the red line is where we're required to have a minimum above this line. This is the 150 wolves. And you can see we're way above the line. So we're in no danger of having being delisted, but we're in danger of having lots of controversy because some people feel there's way too many wolves. But there's the data. These are the components that make up the POM. So I know it's a little overwhelming. You don't have to look too much. The area occupied is basically the number of square miles in which wolves live. And it's pretty level. It shrinks a little bit, but it's pretty flat. The one thing that changed, and that's why there's an asterisk here, with POM, the assumption was the territory size didn't change. And it was at 600 square kilometers or 232 square miles. But we're finding over time, which I will explain, that it did indeed change. The number of packs tapered and gone down a little bit, and the pack size has gone down a little bit consistently over time. So they were looking at all this, and they came up with the new integrated POM model last year. And basically the things to look at, and my screen is covering some of it, I can't see it, there it is the amount of area covered hasn't changed a lot, but the pack size, the pack size here has gotten a lot smaller, and the territory size has gotten smaller. So they reground all these numbers back into POM, and they came up with a new POM, and we're going to go into the chart here to what that means. Basically, you've got smaller packs living in smaller territories so that they believe there's more wolves than what was counted before. The biggest thing is that the main cause of wolf mortality is humans and has been since the beginning. Here's a chart, Scar, I have to move the faces here, that shows what wolves die from. And all the different colors are just the different years. So just look at them in black and white, but pretend, so like for legal harvest, this is all the years from 2000 and, I have to move the picture, sorry, 2006 to 2019. So, and on the left is the number of wolves ranging from 0 to 300. So what you see is by far and away, the largest proportion of known mortalities is due to legal harvest. And then the next biggest group down is agency control. And that would be wildlife services coming in and killing wolves for depredating livestock. And then the next biggest group down is 10J, defensive private property and shoot on site. And that's a special permit. You can shoot a wolf if it's attacking your cattle. There's no law against it. You're free and clear. It's Senate Bill 200. And so that's the next group down. And these are cars and trains. A lot of wolves actually get run over on the highway or hit by a train because they're running down a highway and the snow berms are really high and they can't get off the highway. This is a small patch of illegal, and there's a little bit off to the right that is natural mortality. But all of this basically is human caused mortality. So that's, here's my note on the bottom, 7 to 8 wolves killed annually by natural mortality. And no, this is not all wolves. Don't even go there. This is just the wolves that we know about that are radio collared or brought in to be checked for harvest. So there's a bias because the vast number of wolves that we know about are brought in for checking for harvest or agency control. And then we went and looked at the radio collar mortality rate, which Sarah Sells did for her PhD, and she found the same thing, and that is much more random sample on how they died. So that was interesting. So here's just a kind of broke it into calendar year. These are the combined totals of hunting and trapping together. Control represents wildlife services plus the shoot on site and, you know, defensive property sort of thing. And these are these two numbers added together. This is the estimate of the population from POM, not the minimum count, but these are the actual number of wolves with 95% confidence that we believe are in the state of Montana. This is the percent of the population harvested, and this is the percent of the population harvested and control. So this is all the human stuff over here. What's interesting to me when I went through and added these all up is that every year, the percent of the population being killed keeps increasing. And I put this in yellow down here because this is the new POM with the new model using a smaller territory size and smaller pack sizes. And it's preliminary at this point, but where we had an estimate of 833 in 2019, now the estimate's 1,136. And there weren't 300 more wolves suddenly in 1 year. They're adjusting it. It's a new method. So if you want to be less confused, I would just look through 2019 and look at the trend. But the interesting trend is the percentages of the population being killed keep going up. It's like, well, how can that be? And maybe there's tons more wolves and the population increases as much every year. Or potentially those of you, if anybody's listening who's a hunter or a trapper of wolves, people are getting better at finding them and harvesting them. So how do they remain stable at this pretty darn high level of harvest? Well, the smaller pack size, smaller home ranges. So we used to have a pack of 12 living in 230 square miles. Now you might have 2 packs of 6 and each one's living in 160 square miles, and each one of those females will reproduce. So you've got more females reproducing because the packs are smaller and the territories are smaller. You also, because many wolves are being killed through harvest, you have a lot more mixing up and disintegration of the packs because the structure of these social carnivores gets disrupted, or the breeding pair that holds the pack together, it's like the mother and the father, one of them gets killed and suddenly wolves are dispersing all over, new wolves are coming in. And so there's increased dispersal and increased mate choices, and there's more wolves mating as a result of disrupting the social structure of these established packs. So it's kind of contrary to killing more wolves can equate to less wolves. They make up for it, much like a coyote. So the pups will be born in about early week, about mid-April. So these wolves right now are really working on cranking out pups to try and make up for the additional mortalities. Basically, that's why the numbers have remained the same. Mean annual survival rate means, on average, what percent of wolves make it a year. So during years without harvest, you had about a 78% chance of making it 1 year. And since harvest, you have about a 55% chance of making it 1 year if you're a wolf. The mean population growth rate is 1.02, which means it's just basically stable and slightly over at this point when this was done. Interestingly, the recruitment rate for pups to 5 months means how many make it to 5 months. So your average litter size is about 5.5 to 6 pups per pack. And pups making it to 5 months, you have 2.3 to 4.1 pups per pack. So about half of them, a little less, die. And to make it to 17 months, 1.8 to 3.1 pups make it to 17 months per pack. So not even half of them. Where do wolves survive? Well, they only need three things. They're habitat generalists. They're prey generalists. You know, they can eat anything that's out there and they'll do pretty well. But the three things they must have, they have to have an adequate number of wild ungulates. Ungulate being deer, elk, moose, pronghorn, whatever. And in this photo, those animals are all elk. Those are not cattle. So this would be a good place potentially for wolves. Now, if you were the rancher and that was your hayfield, you might say, geez, I wish they had less elk. Nobody's happy. The second thing is they need large undeveloped landscapes with refugia, meaning a place of escape. They don't need to have wilderness. Wolves live in the 9 Mile Valley and have been there for a long time. They just need a place where they can go and escape the third thing, freedom, persecution from humans, so that they can raise their pups. So, but they will live anywhere that we will tolerate them. We don't tolerate them in eastern Montana, as you can see by the map, because they don't have a place where they can go where they can't be seen. But they're not fussy, and they're making amazing comebacks. I couldn't believe this one wolf made it to Nebraska. What was it thinking? And it didn't end well, needless to say, it was shot. You want to look at a comparison for all the Western states. So here's all the Western states listed on the left, the number of wolves, this is like 2019 through 20, depends on the state, number of packs, square miles of land. And it was interestingly, I added Colorado into this chart. So wolves started showing up in Colorado 2 years ago and breeding. They recorded pups last year and the year before. They walked down there from Wyoming, and now they've got the ballot initiative, the citizens initiative to reintroduce wolves. That passed by a very, very thin margin. California's got wolves now. These wolves are just showing up. This is a map we put together working on a book chapter and updating through 2020, the distribution of wolves in North America by the top scientists in North America. And there's a little dot here for Colorado where they're drifting down from Yellowstone Park. It will be interesting to see what happens. Mexican wolves are a little different genetic type as these populations continue to creep towards each other. Here's the populations in California. They're making a comeback, but got to consider they filled the entire United States, 110 years ago. So they're still returned to a very small portion of their former range. How do we create social tolerance? I would say not through citizens' ballot initiatives and legislation. Those things tend to just make people angry because they feel their voice wasn't heard. People sometimes feel when wolves are reintroduced that they didn't want them and there's a resistance. There seems to be a little more acceptance if wolves walk into an area on their own, like they did in Northwest Montana, versus the outcries against reintroduction. In some places, wolves can never get there. I mean, when the Yellowstone reintroduction happened in 1995 and 96, there were 2 wolves that had gone to Yellowstone Park and were shot about 2 years. Let's see, they were shot in 92, I believe, before the reintroduction. And one of them was shot just south of Yellowstone Park in Fox Creek. And it was a 98-pound black wolf and did the DNA on it. And that wolf was most closely related in DNA to the wolves in 9 Mile, Montana. So there was a wolf that had walked from 9 Mile, Montana down all the way to Yellowstone Park and made it. The other wolf was filmed by a videographer who's a wildlife videographer. And he filmed this wolf on a bison carcass with grizzly bears and coyotes and eagles and all these animals feeding in the Hayden Valley. That wolf just disappeared. So I imagine it was shot as well. But there was this big push. like the wolves are making on their own, hurry up and reintroduce them so we can manage them as a threatened species as a non-essential species rather than endangered species. So anyway, legislation is maybe not the best way to create social tolerance. Right now in our legislature, it will likely be passed. I believe it's on Governor Giannaforte's desk right now is Senate Bill 267, which is a wolf bounty bill that will pay a bounty on wolves killed. And the other one is Senate Bill 314, with the intent stated to reduce the Montana wolf population. And there will be no bag limit per hunter or trapper. So all of us could each go out, and if we are physically able to, go kill 50 wolves apiece. I mean, it's very difficult to find them, but there's no bag limit versus 5, which has been the bag limit since the wolves appeared. The other thing is now people will be able to go out and hunt at night with artificial lights and night vision scopes and electronic calls and whatever they want. And the last change would be use of bait, which hasn't been allowed either. Then there's other bills regarding snaring. I mean, there's just been a whole bunch of anti-wolf bills coming in this legislature, and there's been a lot of discussion about things, and we'll see what ends up coming out the other end of the mill. The better way to work on creating social tolerance is to get people together at the table who normally don't talk to each other and have a conversation and talk about how can we all help each other out. So a program, for example, that I started was the Trago Range Rider program, and it started in 2018 and it's been running for 3 summers now. I'm hoping it will continue this year. I retired from Fish, Wildlife and Parks, so I'm not doing it. But we got together people with the Natural Resource Defense Council, Defenders of Wildlife, Vital Ground, Wildlife Services, which is the branch of the federal agency that kills the wolves that are killing cattle, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, the Forest Service with the grazing allotments, and 6 different multi-generational livestock producing families who were all interested. Now, these people normally would never sit at a table together, but we all agreed on one thing. We want to reduce the number of cattle that are killed by wolves. Everybody could agree on that. And the people who were pro-wolf were happy that less wolves were killed. The people who were anti-wolf were happy because less cattle were killed. So we worked together. We raised funds. We financed and paid for basically a cowboy, a cowgirl, we had both, to ride on the range, be out there with the livestock, hang cameras, trail cameras, and basically when they found wolves in areas, they would call the livestock producer and say, hey, you know, I picked up wolves on your on the camera in your allotment up in such and such creek on the Forest Service. So they alerted the producers, and the predators were there, installed turbo flattery and electric fencing, and did these different things to try and keep the wolves out of the calving areas. It was an amazing thing. And when you find a dead cow, they call the Wildlife Services guy, come out and determine if wolves killed it or not. If wolves killed it, the wolves would be trapped and removed. If wolves didn't kill it, there's many things that cattle die from out there when you turn them out in the spring, and you get to see them once in a while. But if you've ever been up in the Trago, Fortine, Eureka area in the forest there, Swamp Creek, it's like up and down and completely forested and very poor access. And lots of times you don't see your cattle for days or weeks. It's very hard to find them. So anyway, all the wolves are facing all that. So, but this collaboration worked because people talked to each other. The livestock producers had less cattle killed, and the Wildlife Services guys had to kill less wolves. Just having a human presence on the landscape was a great benefit. So those are the kind of things that create social tolerance. The other thing that I feel quite strongly is you have to create a value for wolves. So we all have different values for wolves. If you're a motel owner in Gardner, Montana, wolves have a very strong economic value for it. It brings in about $35 million a year, except for pandemic years. But it's a huge stimulus for the hotels, the restaurants, the gas stations, and everything. If you're a scientist, they have an ecological value. They've done some amazing research in Yellowstone Park and incorporated many researchers studying all different aspects of the coming back of the wolves and how the landscape has changed. Maybe you live in New York City and you'll never get to see a wolf, but it pleases you aesthetically to simply know that they are out there in the landscape. And that's your value. You don't ever have to see them, but you appreciate it. Maybe you're Native American and it has a cultural value to you. You value wolves for their spiritual aspect. If you're a hardcore academic, you want to know the knowledge and get some research published. And then there's a recreational aspect, and recreation can be consumptive or non-consumptive. The people up here on the side of the road with scopes, they come from all over the world to watch wolves. They're non-consumptive users. And then you have the trophy hunter who wants to harvest a beautiful wolf and have that hunt of a lifetime. And for him, having that use is a good experience for them. So we don't all have the same values, but just having a value on the animal in the landscape is better than despising it or not understanding. So I really feel strongly that creating a value and trying to understand each other's values is the best way we can create a social tolerance. So kind of closing here, the thing to remember about the future is that wolves are resilient. You can kill a lot of wolves. They are amazingly resilient, kind of like coyotes. Montana has lots of refuge and habitat. We have lots of adequate prey. Matter of fact, I think in all of the management areas in the state of Montana for elk, there are only 2 that aren't over objective right now. And there are wolves in most of those areas. So that's just the facts. There's lots of prey and there's lots of habitat for them. The wolf harvest is a part of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks management plan, always will be, always has been. Northwest Montana, up where I am, it's the conflicts that come up are more likely to arise with hunting groups who don't want to see the wolves on the landscape for fear they're killing all the deer and elk. The other regions in the state have mostly rancher conflicts because they have more ranching constituents than the hunting community out there. So they're like region 3, the ranching conflicts are the biggest problem. You have to address both, and you have to have tools and to know how to help people in like the Range Rider Project. So knowledge and outreach right now, there's no research going on whatsoever on wolves, and there's outreach. People are doing talks like this, although I'm retired from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Bottom line is wolves are here to stay. I mean, they're here to stay pending socio-political favor. I mean, the pendulum can go the other way, probably won't, but there's always that possibility. If wolves get down below that 150 level, the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to step in and they're going to be relisted. So I think it's foolish to try and eliminate all the wolves because the state of Montana will lose the ability to manage them. The good news about the Northern Rocky Mountain wolves is that the whole Rocky Mountain length, they are now a connected extension to the 15,000 plus wolves in British Columbia, Alberta, and beyond, the Yukon. So it's one big, huge meta population. They're not little island populations like we're experiencing with our grizzly bears. They're connected through dispersal, and there's no evidence of inbreeding, unlike some places like Isle Royale. So wolves have successfully dispersed to Oregon, Washington, Utah, California, Colorado, Nevada, and now we got Nebraska. I saw another wolf made it to Missouri. There was one in Illinois. They're going to keep trying. It's just the nature of the wolves. The old Russian proverb, a wolf lives by its feet. So that's just how wolves are. They've been probably the greatest success story of a recovery in endangered species. And whether you like wolves or not, they have done really well, really quickly. So with that, I think I'll just want to thank you for attending, and I want to thank people who preceded me, and I kind of want to dedicate this talk to Bob Rheem and Mike Fairchild. So thank you, and we can unshare the screen if you want, Sarah, and we'll open it up for questions.
Awesome. Diane, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much.
Sure.
That was awesome. So we are about to dive into questions to everyone that is watching. And if you have a question, make sure that you put it in the Q&A box, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. It's the Q&A box right next to the raise hand button. So I'll just start reading the questions as I see them. First, let me see if I can get your screen off here. Give me 1 second.
I can see the questions too.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, if you would like to read them, you can, or I can read them to you if that's helpful.
Go ahead, that's all right.
Yeah. So Lindsay asks, how do you come up with the minimum number of 150 wolves to sustain?
So that number was determined way back in the 90s when they were trying to decide about all the reintroduction stuff. They sent out surveys to wolf biologists all over the North American continent, Canada and the US, and they asked people, how many wolves do you need to have a viable population such that they can maintain and be removed eventually from endangered species status? And 300 was the number. So I explained how it was 300 over 3 states. Wyoming fell away, so then it was 300 over 2 states. 300 divided by 2 is 150. So that's how the number came to be.
All right. There's a couple questions about palms and estimate numbers for wolves. So this question says, what's to stop hunters from exaggerating when reporting the numbers of wolves that they see while hunting in order to artificially raise the overall wolf count?
That's a really good question. And POM as a model has been developed with lots of assumptions. There's some assumptions that say, you can assume that maybe some hunters will exaggerate the number of wolves you've seen. And you can assume that there's some hunters, their wolves are present in an area and the wolves won't be detected. So the assumption is that those two balance out. And I can't tell you testing the assumptions, how valid they are, but that's a thought. The other thing is how many people see coyotes that they think are wolves. That's another thing too, versus how many people don't detect the wolves. So there's assumptions built into the model that the people who created the model believe make it an accurate count, but it's a good question.
Let's see, this one is asking about a non-lethal coexistence. They're curious if that would work better than killing the apex wolves.
Can you see the questions on the screen? I'm going to close mine because I can't look at it and concentrate. So read it again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's curious about the approach of killing apex wolves and if a non-lethal coexistence would work better.
So killing apex wolves, I presume they mean generally in the entire ecosystem that wolves are the apex species. So people have tried non-lethal in many places, and there's many techniques of using aversive conditioning, and it's been studied over and over, first in Minnesota before wolves were even here, and now here in the West. And there's a paper by Liz Bradley et al. If you are interested, you can Google it on Google Scholar or contact Liz Bradley down in Missoula. But they were trying when wolves were first coming back, and there weren't a lot of them, when there was a depredation, they would, when a cow was killed, they would go in and remove one wolf. And then it would continue and they remove another wolf. Maybe it would stop. They'd go and remove one wolf. Well, over the years, they looked at all the data and they decided that if they had just gone in at the beginning, ascertained that absolutely this cow or sheep was killed by wolves, that you would be better off just going in and removing the pack. Because when you move one wolf, some of the pack members also know how to kill livestock. And then when you remove the pack, other wolves come in that haven't had that same experience and haven't learned that behavior. So a lot of times when you remove the offending pack, the new wolves that come in and reproduce don't kill them. And so that's the philosophy behind what the research says. And I know it's distasteful. Non-lethal methods are nice, but there is no place to move a wolf. A moved wolf is a dead wolf. You're just going to move him to another wolf's territory, or he's going to come back and do the same thing. So moving them doesn't work. That's been shown time and time. And if you guys remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, when these original wolves in Lost Trail and Marion, they kept moving, and it was a horrific cluster, and wolves were mangled, and it was miserable. They would have been better off just taking them away and letting new wolves come in. So that I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Let's see, this one says, what can the change to smaller territories and pack size be attributed to?
Social disruption of the packs. They're killing the breeders, and so the packs reform. You kill a breeder and the packs they disintegrate. A lot of times if you kill the alpha female, for example, just before breeding season, the pack will actually disintegrate. But by the next year, they've reformed and maybe there's 2 packs where there was 1. So it's a social disruption of killing the dominant animals and then continuing to trap lots of wolves out of. I know some packs that get heavily trapped every year. And so the pack can never grow big because maybe they would be able to ecologically have 12 in that pack. They have to get killed every year, so they're never quite at their point.
All right, this one asks about legislation in support of wolf introduction does not create social tolerance among rural communities, but the legislation in support of killing wolves, like Montana, is not helpful either. And then the question is, do you worry about creating tolerance among conservationists?
Creating tolerance among, what was the last part?
Conservationists?
I don't know what that means to create tolerance among conservationists, because I would presume the conservationists would be tolerant. Am I missing something? Did I miss the question?
I was a little confused too. Yeah, maybe David, if we're not hitting the question right there, if you want to type that back in at the bottom of the chat box, we'll readdress that.
I will continue to say that there's people on both ends of the spectrum for wolves. There's the wolf lovers and the wolf haters. Okay. The wolves have to live in the middle. So, but you kind of need both extremes. So then you have a segment in the middle, and working with the people in the middle is the way I see to create social tolerance. And everybody has the value system. That's very hard because people who feel very passionate on either side of the issue cannot possibly share or understand the person that's the opposite side of the issue. But the wolves have to survive in the middle. So it's just how it is.
Yeah. Mary would like to know what it's like working with wolves and what education you had to have in order to work with wolves.
Well, back when I started, I caught my first wolf in Minnesota, in northern Minnesota in 1978, working in Dave Meach's study. I'm really old. I'm ancient history. I'm almost with the dinosaurs. And back then, I totally volunteered. I mean, to get into the show, it's not like she's a young person or a student that wants to get into working with wolves. I strongly suggest that you start volunteering with as many projects as you can. Maybe not wolves. Maybe you go do a turtle study out of Ronan or something, crossing at 9 Pipes. But get involved, because your links will continue to expand through your life and your career. And the people who I first met, I volunteered all the time. And matter of fact, so I could work on Dave Meach's northern Minnesota study, I had to sell my motorcycle so I had enough money to go to school so I could volunteer for my summer internship. Oh, killed me. I love my motorcycle. That's what I had to do because it didn't pay, and I find a lot of times now, when I was working for Fish, Wildlife and Parks, we'd advertise for volunteers, and it was difficult because people have big debts and people couldn't volunteer. And I'm just telling you, that's what you got to do. You got to be like a really good parasite. Persist. And email people and then call them and then stop by their office. Don't just give it one little drop an email in because 1,000 people do that. You got to really be persistent.
That's good advice. Let's see, we have a question. What are the positive environmental effects of a healthy wolf population?
Well, that's been well documented, and as has what people may perceive as negative effects. But there's the whole trophic cascade thing, which you may read about how the return of the wolves saved the willows and saved the beavers and saved the songbirds. And, that's a really nice story, and it works for parts of Yellowstone, and then in other parts it doesn't. But it's pretty amazing. I mean, if you go to Yellowstone Park, where the wolves now are, they're just moving the animals more. And so where elk used to just sit in the creek bottoms and the rivers, they're moving more because the wolves are pursuing them. So anyway, there's lots of debate on that. Let's put it that way. But they have done some good things. And in terms of, I know when the wolves first came back to Yellowstone, there were a lot of very, very old elk, like 20-plus-year-old elk that those wolves were taken. So I would say, I mean, they kill what they can catch. So they tend to catch things that aren't as healthy. It's not because they're seeking out, I'm going to go find an old crippled elk. That's not it. It's just like, I'm going to run through this herd. That one is not as fast. Let's get him. That's how it goes.
Yeah. Let's see. Another one is, do you have any idea what would be an optimal wolf population for Montana?
It's as much as a social tolerance for the people of Montana. And I think we're probably there. I mean, you know, you don't see wolves in 2/3 of the state because they're not tolerated there, because they're too visible, and there's livestock, and there's a lot of conflicts, and there's a lot of roads, whatever. And so we may be at social carrying capacity for wolves in Montana right now. It's not the ecological capacity. Originally, wolves lived in every county in the state of Montana, but it's not 1800s anymore.
Yeah. Let's see. What harvest rate does MT Montana estimate will cause reduction in population?
Can you say that again?
Yeah. What harvest rate? So I'm assuming like the hunting rate of wolves would cause reduction in population.
I think the Senate bill that's being proposed might do that a little bit. The thing is, it's very, as people know, it's very hard to trap or shoot a wolf. They're pretty smart. And so I'll be curious if this bill passes, which it may. I'll be curious when there's no bag limit on wolves, how much the harvest increases. I mean, the belief is that by increasing the bag limit to infinity, that they'll be able to knock the wolf population back by 80% or whatever. I don't know if that will happen or not. And I guess the whole thing that's more concerning is the basis on which they want to do the control is because they think they've killed all the deer and elk. I don't know if you've driven down the Swan or the Bitterroot lately, but there's dead animals all along the side of the highway everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of deer and elk in the state of Montana.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Some of these are similar, so I'm trying to clump the ones that are similar. So this one, it actually kind of, is there a leading cause of wolf mortality in Yellowstone National Park?
In Yellowstone?
Mm-hmm.
The leading cause of wolf mortality in Yellowstone Park is wolves killing other wolves in trespass incidents.
Okay. And then, okay, yeah. And then the second part, is they're hunting outside the park and that wolves leave the park, or is that no longer true?
Well, yeah, our governor just killed a lot of injury. So yeah, I mean, as soon as the wolves step out of the park, they're vulnerable to being harvested. There are the only two places in the state where there are buffer areas for harvesting wolves is a little thin strip around the north side of Yellowstone Park and a little thin strip along the west side of Glacier Park to give those packs that are not used to being shot or trapped a little bit of leeway, a little buffer zone. And there's a subquota of 2 wolves in each of those areas, and that may go away. But yeah, as soon as they're out of the protection of the park, they're harvestable.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. A lot of people are asking for the recording. So I'll just tell everyone there is going to be a recording. We're going to post it on our social media and on our Facebook and on our website. So you guys will be able to access it there. What's the best way to distinguish a wolf from a coyote?
That's a really good one. So the best indicator when somebody tells me, I saw a wolf, and I say, oh, well, how tall was it? Oh, it was as big as a German Shepherd. That's probably a coyote. When people say, oh my God, I thought it was a deer, it was so tall. That's a wolf. So wolves are very, very tall. They are average 90 to 100 pounds average here. Yearlings are smaller. You might get a wolf up to 130 pounds. And they are robust looking. They look thicker. They got a blockier head. They got short ears. Coyotes are pointy ears and a pointier snout. Yeah, and coyotes average 25, 30 pounds.
Cool. Let's see, this one says, are there any behavioral changes that have been noticed when large packs are split up into multiple smaller packs?
I wish I was young so I could do that again in college. It's a great, great question. And I think I don't know right now of anybody that's documenting that, but it's a question that I would love to know if somebody's doing that. It's a great concern. If people are worried about the ethics or the social impact on wolves, mostly wolves are just managed as population level numbers. So this question kind of gets down to individuals. What happens when the packs are disrupted and the breeders are killed? I think if somebody in the audience wants to do a really exciting graduate research project, that would be perfect.
All right. So there are just an overwhelming amount of questions. Everyone had a ton of great questions. I'm going to ask you 3 more questions just to be mindful of everyone's time. And then we will be signing off.
Okay.
Let's see. In your experience, what is the most effective non-lethal adversive tool to dissuade wolves from killing livestock?
That is really easy. A person. If you simply have a person out on the landscape, like a range rider or the rancher checking their livestock, that is the most significant thing you can do, because other things, like they don't work in the dark, you can't see them or whatever, or wolves adjust really quickly. They will learn that flattery, eventually they aren't afraid of anymore. The sound noise devices, they learn to habituate to that. But having a person moving out there, that's what you need to do.
This one says, elk have definitely changed their behavior due to wolves. My question is, other than habitat loss, what is the biggest threat to a healthy population? And I'm
Healthy
not
population.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if they meant wolves or elk there. So
I can't answer the question unless I know what you want. Sorry.
let's see. There's lots of questions about you. And even though you were recently retired, are you going to still be involved with wolves? Or will you write a book about your experience?
Yes and yes. So I do a lot of teaching still. I'm actually going to be helping do some other contract work on interesting wolf projects. And I am working on a book. Yeah, sort of a memoir book, the personal side of 40 years of wolves. So it's an interesting task. And I just saw a comment come up. Somebody brought up the Tom Minor Basin. There are many range rider associations. I got a hats off for bringing that up. I've only been involved with the Trago one, so that's the only one I mentioned. But there's one in Tom Minor. There's one over in the Blackfoot Challenge. They're really effective programs, and they work not just on wolves, but they work with grizzly bears too. So yeah, there are many that are really. I'm just saying it's a great tool. I've only got experience with one of them.
Awesome. Yeah, well, there are a ton of comments here in the chat box, just thanking you for all your information and saying that it was an excellent presentation, which I totally agree. So that's going to be all the questions that we're taking to everyone. So sorry if we did not get to your questions. Those of you that did put them in, thank you so much. And Diane, again, thank you so much. It was really interesting to learn about the history of wolves in this region. We really appreciate your time and your knowledge.
Well, thank you. It was just fun to do. They're really great questions. And, you know, this is a topic that you can't talk about without people getting pretty excited. No, there's nobody neutral about wolves. So you never know what's going to come up. And it's fun for me to talk. And I'm glad I could do the talk. And thanks for supporting it and all of the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to everyone that joined us, thanks again. Make sure to check out our website for information on the Pollinator Week that is happening next week. And we'll be signing off. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.